My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm 34 years old, and I'm a financial analyst for a mid-sized investment firm in Chicago. I'd spent the last year meticulously navigating complex portfolios, dissecting market trends, and ensuring my clients' assets were secure. But none of that mattered to my mother, not really. What mattered, in her eyes, was that I wasn't my sister, Clara. The words themselves weren't new, but the venom behind them that evening felt particularly potent. Honestly, Eleanor, Mom sighed, her eyes sweeping over me with a familiar, disappointed gaze, I just don't understand why you can't get your life together. Clara is thriving, a partner at her firm, building something substantial. You're just floating. A failure, really. The phrase hung in the air of the small, overheated dining room, heavy with the scent of my dad's overcooked pot roast. My fork clattered against my plate, but I forced my hand to remain steady. My immediate reaction was a familiar tightening in my chest, a dull ache I'd learned to live with. Clara, ever the peacemaker, started to interject, but Mom waved her off. Dad, as always, stared fixedly at his plate, tracing the pattern of the floral china. They had no idea, not a single clue, that the very roof over their heads, the house they'd lived in for 40 years and considered their greatest achievement, was still theirs because of that failure sitting across from them. The envelope tucked into my purse, containing the proof of my quiet intervention, felt suddenly heavy, a burning weight. Tonight, I decided, that weight was going to shift. To understand why my mother's words cut so deeply, you need to understand the fabric of our family. My parents, Robert and Susan Vance, had always valued appearances above all else. Our house, a modest but well-maintained two-story in a quiet suburban neighborhood, was their pride and joy. It represented stability, success, and the American dream they'd worked tirelessly for. My father, a retired machinist, was a good man, steady and kind, but easily overshadowed by my mother's more forceful personality. Mom, a former stay-at-home parent, had an almost obsessive need for external validation, which she sought through her children's achievements. Clara, my older sister by 4 years, was her golden child. A brilliant lawyer, married to a successful doctor, with 2 perfect children and a sprawling house in the North Shore suburbs, Clara embodied everything Mom aspired to. I, on the other hand, was the analytical, introverted one, more interested in spreadsheets than social climbing. My career as a financial analyst, while stable and well-paying, lacked the public glamour my mother craved. She'd often lament that I hadn't chosen something more impactful, like law or medicine, or at least found a husband with a more impressive title. My personal choices, from my apartment in the city to my decision not to have children yet, were constant fodder for her gentle, but persistent, criticism. It's just not what I envisioned for you, Eleanor, she'd say, her voice laced with disappointment. You could be so much more. The first sign of real trouble came about 18 months ago. Dad called me, his voice unusually strained. He rarely initiated calls, leaving that to Mom. He explained, haltingly, that a series of bad investment decisions he'd made years ago, coupled with unexpected medical bills from Mom's knee surgery, had put them in a precarious position. They were behind on their mortgage payments, seriously behind. He whispered the word foreclosure, as if it were a curse. My heart sank. I knew they lived month to month on their pensions and Social Security, but I hadn't realized the extent of their financial distress. Your mother doesn't know how bad it is, he pleaded. She thinks we'll figure it out. He needed a significant sum, more than they could ever hope to save, to catch up and prevent the bank from taking action. A few weeks later, Mom called a family meeting. She sat at the head of the dining table, a stack of bills fanned out before her, looking utterly distraught. Dad sat beside her, pale and quiet. Clara and I listened as Mom, through tears, explained they were in a spot of bother. She downplayed the severity, blaming a temporary cash flow issue. She then looked pointedly at Clara. Clara, dear, you're so good with money, and Mark is so established. Could you perhaps help us bridge this gap? Clara, ever practical, explained her own financial commitments, her children's private school tuition, their recent home renovation, Mark's student loans. She offered to help them set up a budget and possibly loan them a small amount, but nothing substantial enough to cover the looming mortgage default. She even suggested they look into downsizing, a suggestion Mom immediately shot down as unthinkable. I remained silent during this exchange. I knew, from Dad's earlier call, that the actual amount needed was far greater than what Mom was admitting to, and far more than Clara could realistically provide without significant strain. After the meeting, Dad pulled me aside. "Eleanor," he said, his eyes filled with a desperate weariness, "the bank needs $61,000 to bring the mortgage current and pay off some compounding late fees. It's the only way to stop the process." My stomach dropped. $61,000. It was a staggering sum. My savings, meticulously built over years of careful budgeting and shrewd investments, amounted to just over twice that. It would be a significant chunk, a blow to my own financial security and my plans for a down payment on a condo. I spent weeks agonizing over it. I ran the numbers, explored every option. Taking out a personal loan would have been difficult, and the interest prohibitive. Asking Clara again was futile. The only viable path was to use my own savings. I knew my parents would never be able to repay it. This would be a gift, a sacrifice. I also knew that if I told Mom, she would either refuse out of pride, or accept it and then use it as leverage for future criticism, twisting it into another example of my eccentric choices. So, I made a decision. I would pay it, but I would do it anonymously, or at least, without Mom's immediate knowledge. I contacted the mortgage company directly. Using my financial analyst skills, I navigated their system, explaining I was a relative interested in helping a struggling homeowner. I arranged for a wire transfer, specifying that the payment was to bring the account current and prevent any further action, but that my name was not to be disclosed to the homeowners unless absolutely necessary. It wasn't entirely true, but it was the only way I saw to get it done. The money left my account, a huge chunk of my hard-earned security vanishing in a digital blink. A few days later, I received a confirmation letter from the bank, detailing the payment and confirming the mortgage was now current and safe from foreclosure. I tucked that letter away, a secret burden and a quiet triumph. Life went on, or so it seemed. The immediate crisis averted, my parents breathed a collective sigh of relief. Mom, however, attributed it to divine intervention and a little help from Clara's budgeting tips. She never once suspected the true source. In fact, her criticism of me seemed to intensify. "Eleanor, you're still renting that tiny apartment? Clara just bought a new Mercedes. Why aren't you thinking about your future? Or, don't you think it's time you met a nice young man? All your friends are married with families." Every phone call, every family dinner, felt like an audit of my life, with Mom as the stern, unforgiving accountant. One particular incident stands out, about 6 months after I'd made the payment. We were at Clara's house for Thanksgiving. Clara had just been made a junior partner at her law firm, a significant career milestone. Mom was effusive, beaming with pride, recounting Clara's achievements to anyone who would listen. "My Clara, so driven, so successful. She truly knows how to make something of herself." Then, she turned to me, a faint smile on her lips that didn't reach her eyes. "Eleanor, dear, I know you work hard, but it's just not the same, is it? You're so comfortable. No ambition, no real drive to push yourself. It's a shame, really. All that potential, just wasted." The words, though wrapped in a veneer of concern, felt like a deliberate blow. I remember gripping my wine glass, the cold condensation a small comfort against my burning palm. Clara shot Mom a warning look, but Mom ignored it. What I didn't understand yet was the depth of Mom's need to diminish me to elevate Clara, and by extension, herself. My quiet competence, my financial stability achieved without fanfare, didn't fit her narrative of what a successful daughter should be. My sacrifice for the house, which should have been a testament to my character, was invisible to her, and therefore, worthless. The more I achieved, the more she seemed to pick at my perceived shortcomings. It was a constant, low-level hum of devaluation that had become a background noise to my life. Then came tonight, the night of the pot roast. Mom's failure comment, delivered with such dismissive finality, was the breaking point. It wasn't just the word, it was the context. It was the culmination of years of being the less favored child, the one who never quite measured up, despite my best efforts and, in this case, a monumental, unacknowledged sacrifice. I looked at Dad, who was still staring at his plate, unable to meet my gaze. I looked at Clara, who looked genuinely pained for me. And then I looked at Mom, her face a mask of self-righteous disappointment. The weight of the secret, the $61,000, suddenly felt unbearable. I had protected their house, their symbol of success, and in return, I was still a failure. The injustice of it all hardened my resolve. I took a deep breath, the scent of pot roast suddenly cloying. "Mom," I said, my voice calm, almost unnervingly so. Everyone looked at me, surprised by the firmness in my tone. "You know, it's interesting you call me a failure. Especially considering the circumstances." Mom raised an eyebrow, a flicker of irritation crossing her face. "What circumstances are those, Eleanor? Your continued inability to find a suitable partner?" Clara made a small, exasperated sound. I reached into my purse, pulling out the folded letter. It was a simple, official-looking document, the bank's logo prominent at the top. "No, Mom," I continued, my eyes fixed on hers. "The circumstances of this house. The one we're sitting in right now." I unfolded the letter slowly, deliberately, and slid it across the table towards her. "About 18 months ago, Dad called me. He told me you were facing foreclosure. That you needed $61,000 to bring the mortgage current and save the house." Mom's face went pale, her eyes darting from me to the letter. Dad finally looked up, his expression a mixture of fear and dawning comprehension. Clara gasped softly. "What are you talking about, Eleanor?" Mom stammered, her voice thin. "That's not true. We had a slight issue, but it was resolved." "It was resolved because I resolved it," I stated, my voice steady. "Clara couldn't help with that amount, and you certainly couldn't, as you were unaware of the true figures. So, I paid it. $61,000, from my savings, directly to the mortgage company. The payment was made on October 14th, last year. This letter confirms it." I watched her eyes scan the document, her jaw slackening as she saw the amount, the date, the confirmation. The color drained from her face, replaced by a blotchy red. Silence descended, thick and suffocating. Dad pushed his chair back slightly, a tremor running through him. Clara stared at me, then at Mom, her expression a mixture of shock and profound understanding. Mom looked up from the letter, her eyes wide, glistening with unshed tears, but not of gratitude. More like shock and humiliation. You did what?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You paid, without telling us?" "I paid to keep your home," I clarified, "because I didn't want to see you lose it. And I didn't tell you because I knew you'd either refuse, or it would just become another thing for you to subtly criticize me for. Another way for you to say I wasn't doing things the right way." I paused, letting the words sink in. "So, when you call me a failure, Mom, I want you to remember that failure paid $61,000 to save the house you call your greatest achievement." The confrontation shattered the carefully constructed facade of our family dinner. Mom couldn't speak, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Dad, tears welling in his eyes, reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Eleanor," he choked out, I don't know what to say." "Thank you. Thank you, sweetheart." Clara, recovering her composure, came around the table and hugged me tightly. "Ellie, I had no idea. That was incredibly generous of you." Mom, however, reacted with a mixture of anger and shame. She pushed the letter away as if it burned her. "How dare you embarrass me like this, Eleanor," she finally hissed, finding her voice. "Bringing this up now, in front of everyone. It's manipulative." "Manipulative?" I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping me. No, Mom. It's the truth. And it's the truth you needed to hear, especially after calling me a failure for the umpteenth time. I'm not a failure. I'm the daughter who quietly ensured you still had a home to criticize me in. I stood up, pushing my chair back. The pot roast suddenly looked unappetizing. I think I've lost my appetite. I left shortly after, the silence of my departure louder than any argument. The aftermath was a slow, uncomfortable unraveling. For weeks, Mom didn't call. When she finally did, her voice was clipped, devoid of her usual criticisms, but also of any apology or gratitude. She acted as if the incident had never happened, a bizarre form of denial. Dad, however, called me frequently, expressing his profound gratitude and regret. He even started coming to my apartment for coffee, something he'd never done before, and we talked more openly than we ever had. Clara was a steadfast ally, frequently checking in, acknowledging my sacrifice, and gently trying to mediate with Mom, though with little success. The dynamic with my mother irrevocably changed. Her words no longer held the same power. The sting of her criticism was dulled by the knowledge of my own actions, the quiet strength I had shown. I realized that her perception of me was her problem, not mine. I had saved their house, not for her approval, but because it was the right thing to do for my father and for the family history tied to those walls. Months later, I visited the house for Dad's birthday. Mom was civil, if distant. I walked through the familiar rooms, the worn armchair in the living room still in its place, the same floral china on the dining table. The house, which had once felt like a cage of expectations and criticism, now felt different. It was still their home, but it was also a testament to my own quiet strength, a silent monument to a sacrifice that had, finally, spoken volumes. I looked at the old wooden mantelpiece, where a framed photo of Clara and her family sat prominently. My own photo, a smaller, older one, was tucked away behind a vase. It didn't bother me anymore. The house was safe. And I, Eleanor Vance, was no one's failure.